Every guitarist struggles with improvisation. We're told to learn all these different scales, but we're never really shown how to use them over chord progressions in order to sound musical. Well, today we're going to find the simplest way possible to improvise over a chord progression using major and minor chords with our favorite scale on the guitar, and that of course is the pentatonic scale. If you don't know who I am, I help intermediates become more advanced guitarists. Now, we actually have a free school community for like-minded intermediate guitarists like yourself who are also trying to improve and progress on the instrument. Within this community, I also offer a one-on-one guitar transformation service. So if you're interested in that, join the community, message me, and we'll see if we can get started. First, we need to know that we can play a scale all the way up and down the neck. Scales are just a series of notes, and these notes repeat themselves in multiple places all across the neck. As a result of this, we have to learn multiple different scale shapes across the neck in order to deeply understand the fretboard. Now, with our pentatonic scale, we have 5 different shapes we need to learn across the neck. I'm sure a lot of us are very familiar with this basic box shape over here. And again, if we look at what's going on within this shape, it's 5 different notes repeating themselves multiple times. So a pentatonic scale, penta is 5. We have 5 notes in our pentatonic scale. And those are 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the 5th note there. And then we go back to the root note again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then back to the root again. And you can see that these notes keep repeating themselves downwards. We can also keep repeating these notes across the neck as well, right? So we can go. We can keep going across the neck as well. So for this reason, we need to learn multiple different scale shapes in order to fully understand how to play the scale all the way across the fretboard. Now, you might already be familiar with some of these, but just in case for the people that aren't fully familiar, I'm going to run through the 5 pentatonic shapes that we're going to need to understand today in order to play along through this video and also learn from this video as well. Now, these 5 different positions, they look something like this. So we have position 1 in the key of A minor. It looks like this. And we have position 2, it looks like this. And then we have position 3, looks like this. Then we have position 4, which looks like this. Then we have position 5, which looks like this. And then after position 5, the first shape just repeats itself all the way up an octave. Now, when we connect and play these shapes together in sequence, we get a framework in which we can play this pentatonic scale all across the fretboard. We're finding places to repeat these 5 notes all the way up and down the neck. And yeah, when we pair everything together, we can kind of play through the scale like this. The exact same shape can be used to play both major and minor pentatonic sounds. All we have to do is emphasize a different root note whilst using these exact same shapes. Now, depending on the root note we choose, it determines whether we are playing a major pentatonic sound or a minor pentatonic sound. So, for example, we all know that this shape right here is the A minor pentatonic scale. We're starting from the root note of A. However, if I take this exact same box shape and I move it down over here, but still start from the root note of A, I get the major pentatonic of A now. And again, I can run through these same shapes in sequence. To get the A major pentatonic sound. So if you want to play a major or minor pentatonic sound, you're still using the exact same scale shapes here. It's just you're changing which root note you emphasize in order to determine whether it's a major pentatonic sound or a minor pentatonic sound. So now that we know how to play major and minor pentatonics all across the fretboard, what do we need in order to use these scale shapes to improvise through chord changes? Well, the first most simple step is to actually pair a pentatonic scale shape on top of the chord shapes we're already quite familiar with. So we know that we can play like major and minor bar chord shapes like this from the 6th string root. So I could play A major like this here. And I could play like F sharp minor, like this over here. Now we're going to figure out how to pair one of our pentatonic scale shapes over those chord shapes. So for our A major chord, we can actually run through the second position of the pentatonic scale. So this gives us a spot to both play the chord and improvise over the top of it. And again, we can do the exact same thing for the minor bar chord shape as well. So if I had F sharp minor, I can play the first position of our pentatonic scale over the top of that. So essentially what you want to do, you want to know the chords you're playing in your chord progression, and then figure out how to pair a pentatonic scale shape over the top of them. So if I had a chord progression that was A major to F sharp minor, I could run through the pentatonic shape for each corresponding chord and play and improvise maybe something that sounds like this. So what I just did there is I played the major pentatonic shape that fits on top of the A major chord, and then when the next chord comes around, I move to the F sharp minor pentatonic shape that fits over our F sharp minor chord. Now, some of you might have realized here when kind of messing around with this, that this is actually our relative major and minor with our pentatonic scale. Our relative major and minor pentatonic scales are going to share the exact same notes. They share identical notes within their scales, which means you can use the exact same scale shapes in the exact same fret positions to run and down, up and down each chord. Now, to make them sound major or minor, we just have to revolve around different root notes. So within these shapes, for example, you could use this second position to sound like an F minor pentatonic. You just need to make sure that you revolve around the note of F sharp. But again, you can use this shape over here to also emphasize the A major pentatonic. You just need to make sure that you revolve around the note A. Now, some of us might be quite comfortable playing in like one position to play these chords. But again, we learnt the scale all the way across the neck. So we want to be able to use what we learnt, right? We don't want to kind of get lost whenever we go up and down the neck and only really stay in one spot. So that's why it's useful to also be able to find out how to pair other chord shapes on top of the scale shapes that we've already learnt for our pentatonic scales. So we're going to look at another way to play these exact same two chords with different scale positions for different chord shapes across the neck. So we know that we can also play major and minor chords from the 5th string root. For example, we can play A major like this, and we can play F sharp minor like this. Now again, we can do the exact same process where we pair our pentatonic scale shapes on top of these chord shapes. So for our A major chord shape, we're going to play the 5th position of our pentatonic scale. And then for our F sharp minor chord, we're going to play the 4th position of our pentatonic scale. So we can do the exact same process again, where we play between these two chords, but this time we're playing in new scale positions, which is going to allow us to come up with new types of phrases and ideas, and allow us to kind of flow across the fretboard between different spots on the neck. So if I was to improvise just using these two different positions, I could play something that maybe sounds like this. You can figure out how to do this yourself anywhere you want on the neck by learning your triad shapes and then figuring out where your pentatonic scale shapes actually fit over the top of those triads. Again, your triads are hidden inside of pentatonic shapes. So for example, like if we take this chord we just did over here and then we paired it over the top of that, we have like this A major triad over here that fits over the top of that scale position. Again, same thing goes for this F sharp minor as well. We have this F sharp minor triad right here. Those notes are inside your pentatonic scale shape. Same thing goes for these chords we just played over here. This is our A major triad. Those notes are inside your pentatonic scale shape. Again, same thing for our F sharp minor triad that we learned over here with this chord shape. We have this F sharp minor triad over here. Again, that triad shape is actually hidden inside of your pentatonic scale shape. The notes inside of your triad are also found inside of your scales. Now, the reason we sound like we're actually playing over the chord changes here is because the notes that make up the pentatonic also contain the notes that make up the triad of each chord we're playing over. They can be found inside of our pentatonic scale. These triad shapes are hidden everywhere inside of your scales. Now, the reason pentatonic scales are such a great place to start with improvising on the guitar and playing through chord changes is that a pentatonic scale, it only contains 5 notes, right? Penta meaning 5, so like pentagon, pentagram, just 5, okay? Now, like we just discussed a second ago, we can find our triads inside of these pentatonic scale shapes, and our triads are the chords that we're playing over the top of. So that means within our 5 notes, 3 of them are going to be chord tones. So this means when we play the corresponding pentatonic scale for the chord we're playing over the top of, we have a 60% chance of playing a chord tone, i.e. a note from our triad. That would be a root, a third, or a fifth. So whenever you go up and down the corresponding pentatonic scale shape for the chord you're playing over, you have a 60% chance of hitting a root, a third, or a fifth. Now, again, this is a great place to start. Again, in the future, we want to become more intentional and give ourselves a 100% chance of hitting a root, or a third, or a fifth by fully learning our triad shapes. But again, this is a great place to start because it sets you up for learning this stuff in the future. Now, what we just did was quite simple when we're just playing over 2 chords that share the same relative scale shapes, right? But what happens when we start adding in more chords into our progression that force us to go into different pentatonic scale shapes. This is where most of us are confused. We don't understand that we have to switch to different pentatonic scale centers for each chord. So now we're going to figure out how to solo over 4 different chords in a progression. Most commonly, there are 4 chords in a chord progression that we want to kind of like improvise through the chord changes. So we're going to solo from A major to F sharp minor to B minor and then to E major. So we're going to figure out how to do the same thing there. So first step, let's play the bar chord shapes from the 6th string root for each of these chords in our chord progression. So we have A major, and we have F sharp minor, then we have B minor, and then we have E major. And we learned earlier that we can actually attach these pentatonic scale shapes on top of these chord shapes. So we have A major, we can play the A major pentatonic scale. We have F sharp minor, and we can play the F sharp minor pentatonic. We have B minor, which we can play the B minor pentatonic. And then we have E major, which we can play the E major pentatonic. So when we put everything together, we can flow between these different positions to improvise through the chord changes. So again, we want to pair the pentatonic scale shape with that chord shape and go between them and switch between them for each consecutive chord that comes by in our progression. Again, we need to be anticipating when the next chord comes up. If we don't realize that we have to change between positions, we're going to get lost on the fretboard and fall behind the chord changes. Now, if I was to put everything together and flow between these positions, we might be able to play something that sounds like this. Now this, in my opinion, is the simplest way to sound somewhat musical when we're improvising and playing over the top of our chord changes. If you've never done this before, keep practicing to get used to the idea of switching scales for each corresponding chord that you're playing. You want to match your major chord, your A major chord with your A major pentatonic, your F sharp minor chord with your F sharp minor pentatonic, your B minor chord with your B minor pentatonic, and then your E major chord with your E major pentatonic, right? You want to be able to get into the idea of playing the corresponding pentatonic scale for the corresponding chord that you're playing over the top of. Now, for those of you who are comfortable and confident with taking these shapes and just playing them over the top of each chord that comes around in your progression, we can actually level this up one step further. Now again, if you aren't comfortable with doing that, keep practicing this and then move along to the next step. But I believe you'll be able to get it under your fingers pretty quickly, right? So, we can find ways to bring chords closer to each other and scale positions closer to each other as well on the fretboard without having to completely jump across the neck each time. Sometimes it's quite confusing to have to jump across the neck and we get a bit lost when especially the chords come by fairly quickly. Now, we can bring things closer together by 1, finding chord shapes closer together, and then 2, pairing these pentatonic shapes over the top of these chords. So, for example, let's say we have a new chord progression. We have G major to F sharp minor, and then to B major. So we could play those chords like this. We could go G major, then F sharp minor, and then we could jump all the way up here to go to B major. And then we do the same thing before where we play the corresponding pentatonic for each of these chords. We could go like... again, it's a bit disorientating sometimes to keep jumping across the fretboard. We can actually bring things closer together. So we understand that we can play chords from the 6th string root, or we can play them from the 5th string root if we know what our root note is. So if we know that the root note B is also here on the 2nd fret of the A string, we can play the chord progression like this. Now, we learned earlier that we can actually attach a pentatonic scale to each of these chord shapes. So for our G major chord, we can play G major pentatonic for shape 2. F sharp minor with our first position of the minor pentatonic. And then for this B major chord like this, we can play our 5th position of the pentatonic. So now when we play through all these chords together, we can pretty much improvise everything within this quite close fret range over here. And this is a lot more convenient when we're playing, and it's going to get you into more of a flow state when you're improvising. So if I played all these chords close together and used the scale shapes close together, I could come up with improvisational phrases that might sound something like this. Again, when we bring these chord shapes closer together, we also bring the scale shapes closer together with them. Like I said a minute ago, this allows us to get more into a sense of flow when we're improvising. And you're also going to find that you can flow between multiple different scale shapes over one chord, right? So for example, in this B major chord that I played over here, there are times when I was improvising, I went between the 5th position of the pentatonic, and then I went up into this next scale shape. So you'll find ways to kind of bridge the gap between these two shapes and kind of bring them all together. And then, yeah, when you play each chord, you're going to be able to play that scale shape all the way up and down the neck. And then when you go to the next chord, you play the different scale shape all the way up and down the neck. And that's going to get you into this kind of real kind of like Zen state of flow when you kind of master these things. This is something to look forward to when you keep practicing these concepts. And you'll find that when you're confident with pairing all your triads and inversions with the pentatonic scale shapes all over the fretboard, you'll be able to improvise all over the neck without really actually running out of ideas. You're going to find new places to come up with phrases all across the fretboard, and you're going to be like an improvisational idea generating machine. The reason we run out of ideas is because we kind of stay in one spot all the time. However, if we can learn to branch out and find new places to play the chord and new scale shapes around that chord, we're going to find new ways to come up with ideas. You're also going to find that when you're really comfortable with pairing your triad shapes with the corresponding pentatonic shapes, suddenly playing like all these weird non-diatonic complex chord progressions will become so much less confusing. All you have to do is follow your chord shapes and then play the corresponding pentatonic scale for each chord that comes by in your progression. So let's say we have a long, complex chord progression. For example, we might have the chords A minor to E minor to D major, and then let's go to C sharp minor to G major to B minor, and then from F sharp minor to G major to A major, and then back to the start again. Again, that's like a weird kind of complex chord progression. We have 9 different chords that keep cycling through different key centers. And you might be thinking, well, how am I supposed to kind of solo along to that? I can't really use one scale. What you have to do is know how to play the chords for each of them and how to pair that pentatonic scale shape for each chord that comes by. Well, as long as we know our triad shapes for our progression and we can play the pentatonic scale shapes around each triad, we'll still be able to flow through these weird, complex, non-diatonic chord progressions. So, if I was to play an example over the top of those 9 different chords all cycling through different key centers, I might be able to play something just like this, only using pentatonic scale shapes that we've covered today around these chord shapes. The most important thing I want you to take away from this video is that you need to start learning to change your scale position according to the chord you're actually playing over the top of, rather than just endlessly running up and down the exact same scale shape no matter what chord comes by. We need to be able to pair the corresponding scale and chord shape for each chord that comes by in our progression. So this might mean sometimes that when a new chord comes by, we have to switch to a new scale position. And if you want to really level up your improvisation, I recommend you practice a lot with a looper pedal. This has probably been the biggest improvement I've made to my playing when I was practicing, by putting a loop down and then improvising over the top of those chords. And again, if you want to do that, if you want to get good at using a looper, you're going to need to learn how to make your rhythm parts a lot more interesting too. Well, conveniently, I made a video that you can watch over here that breaks down exactly what you need in order to make your chord progressions sound more interesting, intriguing, and sophisticated, which is going to make them a lot more fun to rip a solo over the top of.